supposed to be getting into which is actually seasonable weather, which is not so bad as everybody else in the country that has to deal with high humidity and fires and all the other crap that's happening. So welcome to Evolution Hour, latest installment, the exciting world of replacing Darwin, which, as I threatened last week, I was going to be dealing with yet another chart that he puts in the stories on his bits about speciation. Oh, he's got this cute little chart here. Isn't he? So exciting. And then that leads to this little puppy where, surprise, surprise, linear development of species, presumably since the flood. And we're now talking about world monkeys. So if Erica managed to watch the show, since that's her speciality, we'll see what happens on. As far as I can tell from his time frame, since he starts at about 400 years after the zero and down to about 1600, it sounds like he's thinking that all of these old world monkeys, Cercopithecidae, are coming 1950 BCE down to about 750 BCE, which is an interesting amount of time frame and a frisky little bit. As I did in the one last week, I picked up on, because he doesn't really supply enough detail to be able to track down why he's arriving at the stuff he does, as are these little numbers that are on the sides of the various texts up. And RJ patrons, stuff on the screen. Thank you very much for holding on to the old RJ during all of this time. I can realize how, especially with inflation and all the rest, why it's amazing that I'm holding on as it is. I appreciate so much all the help that you do. I couldn't be doing it without you, literally. Okay, we'll get rid of that. And so you can now see my mug again. And I suddenly realized you probably couldn't have seen much of this. Okay, there we go. There's our little chart. Isn't that sweet? Isn't that lovely? There we go. And there's our other little chart. The one that he had last week, I followed the same routine of where I'm looking at the branch length numbers that he's doing on his phylogeny, which looks not dissimilar to a standard evolutionary one. So it doesn't sound like there's any tremendous insights coming from Jeanson that's disrupting the internal relationship of things, with the exception that he seems to be leaving some data out and he's leaving all of the fossil examples out. So other than that, it's just fine and dandy. Presumably he's thinking all the fossil forms are dying out in the flood. Therein lies a snag, as they will be getting to shortly. Part two of the show, which we may or may not get to in any great detail, is a new piece by Lucian Twinstra, a new character who's posting an awful lot at CMI these days, the early victim of the dinosaur extinction impact, where he's finally kind of getting around to noticing the fact that Chicxulub is a real thing. And he cites a paper from 2014, from 2019, De Palma, which is talking about finding the smoking gun of the actual impact event up in the Dakotas in there. And he's finally getting around to all of that. So thank you for welcoming into the thing. But what's funky about it, you can see that he doesn't discuss the backstory, which is his creationists have been denying that many of them have been denying for years that there was an impact event at all. So now he just blithely accepts it as, oh gosh, it's just perfectly fine. It's doesn't have any problem about that now. So that's an amusing one that you can take a look at, and we allude to it briefly in volume 2 of Rocks for There. So what to do about all of these things? I picked up on one group, the Alanopithecus, which is an African primate that has a really long branch number according to his listing. And then I noticed that I was looking for the ones that were the most recent, and there's the Trachypithecus bunch from Southeast Asia. Hi, Slade! Yes, I started just a tad bit early because it looked like my numbers were absolutely spectacular. And I'm just going through a for the remainder of the chapter, he's got a pile up of these charts where he's magically determining that just about everything he looks at has a linear speciation that's taken place like right after the flood down to some point. And the number scales vary according to this. This one is running through the Bronze Age into the Iron Age for these various primates. Well, Australopithecus, which is one of the longer branch groupings, apparently, remember, we don't have a detailed listing of what numbers he's assigning to what as to why he's filing things the way they are. It's all very murky. You could theoretically find his original data field. He's listing these downloaded genomes, but because he's massaging them and processing them, how does he come up with where they do? He doesn't have available like a spreadsheet or something where you can actually see what's coordinating with what. That would be too tight. We know he didn't do that in some of these other papers that he's done. The one that he was discussing with Dan Stern Cardinale and Joel Duff. None of them can figure out how he's arriving at most of his charts, and this is just as bad. So just from the methods angle, it's understandable that even within his own camp, Robert Carter, for example, is not terribly impressed with the new trace book. And since he's basically following the same murky procedures that he's doing in this stuff, it doesn't surprise me. Anyway, I looked into Australopithecus, and it turns out it's had a funky little issue about how closely it is related to another species, the Myopithecus. And it depends on whether you're including the mitochondrial DNA or just the nuclear DNA. And there's an assortment of little studies that's been done on that. And I put a one from a 2002 paper that reviews some of this stuff. And then I immediately wondered, well, where is Myopithecus on Jeanson's chart? Gosh, it ain't there. So he's leaving some stuff out. So Australopithecus looks like, according to, given the numbers on the chart and how it would relate to things, it sounds like this one is coming into play maybe 1900 BCE. And how and when? What's going on with Africa? There's a paper from 2017 that I thought that was kind of relevant, Lo Bianco, on the Certhopithecus monkey phylogeny. That's the ones that occupy most of the block on Jeanson's chart. And then a 2020 paper, hot off the presses, from Aronson, which also deals with a lot of phylogeny, and it's related to, I thought it was a particularly delightful one to see. Let me see if I can pull my picture out in here. Yeah, the Aronson paper, Skeletal Morphology of the Lasula and the Evolution of Guinan Locomotor Behavior. They're wondering about the fact that some of them are arboreal and some of them are strictly terrestrial, and what's what. And from their point of view, depending upon which genes you're looking at, however you look at it, it looks like there's a variety of options as these arboreality is popping up convergently in a variety of different lineages. And so it's probably going to be something that's being thrashed over in biogeographically and others to try to figure out what exactly was going on, probably in relation to the changing climate as the ice age goes out. Because all of this bunch of old world monkeys trace back to some 8 million years, well back into the Miocene, but the current bunch of species are much more recent in the Pleistocene. As recent as 1950 BCE? I don't think so. And then, of course, a fossil record. So there's a wonderful paper from PNAS. Again, I'll be putting the linkages up to that. One that's just been discovered. This is from 2014. And they're going into the Asiatic and African clusters. You'll notice that there's a bunch of African primates that are expanding into Asia and developing, all involving fossil forms. Now, Jeanson is of the group of creators that is not willing to put the Miocene in the flood times. It's post-flood. So why aren't they on his list? Just because they're listed from fossil teeth and aren't extant species, what happened to them? they clearly went extinct between 1900 BCE and 750 BCE. A lot of funky stuff seems to be going on in this ridiculously compressed time frame. Yes, it's like yes, yeah. And, it's a really amusing. Some of the stuff I find in some of the online postings of Jeanson stuff. He's not quite as relentlessly repetitive as Andrew Snelling is in a lot of his posts, but nevertheless, and if you can find a copy of the whole bloody book, I don't recommend you actually shell out money for it. And do a little interrupt because I had a rather busy week. I first gig as a paid lecturer on Saturday, speaking to a group of some 20 internationals, and I mean international, Finland, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, religious people from various perspectives, some from Pakistan and others, who together by a Seattle University and needed to interact with. They wanted me to. Mine was put forward as somebody that could discuss the separation of church-state issue from a secular atheist perspective and the kind of the background on it. And they were planning on having a couple talks on this. And I wasn't sure whether or not I would just have one chance, this one in July, but I think I did really well with it and had no problem persuading that I'm set to do one in August for a similar group of people. They were really a fascinating bunch. We had excellent questions. They were all fluent in English, and so we had no difficulties on that. And I created a handout, which was a listing of some of the important legal decisions and cultural context and some of the important people involved in the atheist movement over the years, and then a full page of reference bibliography, books, and also articles on the separation church-state issue and all of that. That was a handout that they could have afterwards. And the response was really wonderful. Several of the people came up to me afterwards and were very happy with the tenor. And I'll try to find out later how they all went to dinner together afterwards. And if I was running properly, I will have inspired a great deal of interesting conversation and thought amongst them. So it turned out absolutely delightful. And I expect to have a similar interaction with the next bunch that come in August, where I get paid again. So that's a nice little bit for some extra things. I can get a new pair of glasses. I'll be able to afford to do that. So back to the wacky world of the Miocene fossils. So we've got a circumstance where all of these primates are apparently developing, speciating in the family in the period from 1900 BCE, which is Bronze Age times, down into the Iron Age of 700s. Whereas in the paleontological context, at the minimum, all of those extant species are developing only in the Pleistocene over the last few million years. That's an interesting little operation going on. Another factor that I'll be dealing with will be to look at his version of the kind phylogeny. Are all these old world monkeys lumped together in the Ark encounter or not? So all of this is stuff that I'm relating to. I never pay for the thing to do. To Dan Stern Cardinale, a PDF of Jenson's next book, Trick, which has a bibliography, which is more than can be for replacing Darwin. There is no reference bibliography in it. It's just the right when this book is done, move directly into trace. That'll be the going through and seeing where he's citing all of this stuff in the book. And secondly, how much of it is retread from his replacing Darwin book and how much is genuinely new, and how much of it is older material that he apparently has encountered or deployed that he didn't deploy in the first book versus material that dates after 2017 book. So is presumably stuff that he that. So scholarly radar be out to kind of ferret out how he's constructing it. It's gotten a terribly bad review, very politely worded, but still a bad review from Robert Matt. Dan Stern Cardinale has pointed out there's some colossally stupid things in it. Joel Duff has out there's some colossally stupid things in it. So it doesn't look like, oh, yes, Brian, tentatively awake. Well, I'm operating here. It's been a funky little time going out. I'm surprised at how the lawn hasn't burned up yet. But we're going to be hitting into the 90s and 100s very soon. So I'm going to be watching that. And it doesn't look like at the moment that we're going to have to worry about water rationing or anything. There have been some plans afoot to kind of prepare for that, just in case we get a really super droughty condition up here. But we seem to be kind of moving so okay. The heat wave apparently is going to hit 100 or so in Seattle. My niece over in Seattle, they're going to be roasted. They cannot take temperatures that high over there. We're kind of used to it over here. So there we go. And also, I'm busy, Beaver, working on volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. I'm ferreting through the last 15 years of the Acts and Facts magazine from the Institute for Creation Research, some of which I've already cited in the first book here, and to some of it even in the Evolution Slam Doc. But because so much of it relates to the cosmology issue and other factors that weren't touched on in either one of those, I'm working through to make sure all of that's been done up, because you've got a bunch of people, Jake Hebert and Jason Lyle and others, who just run off at the mouth on cosmology issues and dumping on the Big Bang and all that. And a thing that we'll be mentioning in the new book about the CET a tracking hypothesis thing that Randy Gugliuzza at the Institute for Creation Research has come up with as his replacement for natural selection. And it ain't flying. Even other, in fact, Jason Lyle left ICR over this. He says that they aren't even a reliable source of information anymore. Like, this is a news bulletin. This is coming from Jason Lyle. Joel Duff mentioned all of that. But anyway, Gugliuzza has been spewing in the 2018-29 period almost every month an iteration of his CET hypothesis, because he's the editor of the magazine. You know, Whoopigus runs in here. Slade, nice and chilly here. Got to admit, it's warm for winter though. Yeah, Southern Hemisphere will do that. Yes. There's concerns, I think, that there are drought conditions in Australia, and global climate modeling and that kind of suggests that's the case. Kansas is here in the United States in a terrible state, in kind of a permanent drought. California is in a permanent fire cycle. The Yosemite is currently burning. They managed to save the sequoias farther north, and yet idiots will say that there's no such thing as climate change. They're broiling over in Europe. It's a terrible irony, but so long as because we're a big wine growing region and we get our water for our various wineries from the Columbia River, so long as that stays fairly stable, our climate is such that we're probably okay. Whereas it looks like the rainfall-oriented Italian and French wine industries, in the droughts they're going through, it may kill a huge number of them off. So it's going to be an interesting time. England, maybe the little fruity little numbers they used to grow during the Middle Ages up in Britain, that's coming back in fashion, I guess. And who knows, maybe we'll have wine growing in Greenland if we keep it going on it. But anyway, so there will be a panoply of sources then that you'll be able to dive into on the old world monkeys. O'Brien says storm in Poland was sideways wind hard enough to be cold. Oh yeah. Maybe they're maybe God is trying to give them a message about their social policies, but you know, culture campers never do that. You know, God can only Pat Robertson would be arguing that a hurricane hitting Florida is because there are too many gay people there, but you never find the culture campers ever contending that God is trying to tell you something that you're doing wrong. Anyway, yeah, we're in for an interesting little time. And of course, we still have the Ukraine war going on, and then we have the Chinese, and who knows what else can happen on. So For the next 5 or 10 years, I'm crossing my fingers that we'll be able to slide through all of this mess. I put a little link up on my Twitter feed earlier because Nick Sentner had wanted to do some volunteer work so that geology students could be in a lot of these projects without having to pay money for them. So they would be, volunteer financing. And a bunch of people stepped forward, a couple hundred donators that got like $30,000 to be able to underwrite these things. And he was thanking everybody on his video feed today. And that made me feel so good because I'm often in a grumpy mood because of Donald Trump and all of the nincompoops surrounding him and the sycophants and the people who can't get a grip on climate change, and Senator Manchin's tooling around in his Maserati, clipping coupons from his coal stock and yet sabotaging aspects of the climate response. And this kind of cheered me up because there are people still knocking around in the educational field and in the world in general who are improving people's minds, who are inspiring people to learn about stuff and study and understand things. And I can contrast that with like Matt Getz. Why does Matt Getz exist? He's a net detriment to the universe. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jim Jordan. They're people that if they were swept away by a space alien, would they be missed? Would civilization suffer as a consequence? Hell no. So there we go. There's my rant for the evening on that. Yes, seed stocks. Yes, there's so many. We're going to be in such an exciting time in terms of invention. Some of the people around in my own state here are working out clever things to do about integrating solar systems, solar panel systems and electric systems with agricultural stuff underneath, and working out a variety of very ingenious ways to do things. I see that there is a report on stuff down in Arizona where they're changing the color of the pavement that they're doing, which cuts down on the amount of heat it absorbs and therefore cuts down on the heat signature in places like Phoenix. I mean, there's a whole bunch of little things to do. And from what I know about how economic systems run and how political systems run and nonlinear systems, the safest thing to do and the most resilient thing to do is not to put your interest all in one basket. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. There is no magic fix. We just do X. It's like the monocausism phrase. I'll type that into here. Monocausism. That was the word that Jackson Wheat came up with, and we make a use that monocausism. There we go. That's the tendency you find in a lot of superficial thinking and in the sciences to find the cause of something when it's got a bunch of factors going on. And in the case of a resilient system, one of the reasons why biological systems tend to work so well is because another fancy little word here, kludge, that somebody coined. I think Daniel Dennett's made use of it, although I'm not entirely coined it. Somebody else did, I think, which is jury rig stuff and things that are kind of complicated and they work out effectively. That when you have a system that runs that way and can stand a degree of perturbation, it tends to be more resilient. And so the idea of having a single system that's going to make you better, no, you have a bunch of different things, the combination of which will work. And plus having, frankly, it's like, a diversified electric grid where you have some centralized installations using power systems from a variety of different sources, eventually renewable or non-carbon fuel based. And you've got people with a major interest, and this is where progressive legislators need to be involved. There's an awful lot of wealthy people who are, including, oh God, what the hell's the hedge fund guy? He's bought up a ton of these electric grid companies around in both Texas and elsewhere. And it's not good for their bottom line if you have cogeneration where people who have solar electric systems can sell excess power into the grid. Well, boy, that's not good for their bottom line, but it's really good for the environment and a sustainable grid. So they're balking any efforts to do by grassroots changes to various legislative means in their legislators, or also by initiative. They've been blocking it at every turn, and that's just plain stupid. So people that live in zones like that where they have deal with it, we have a different set of circumstances over here. I see that's something that is absolutely essential to do, a decentralized system. Me, I always think losing hops from beer, good riddance, yes. I'm not a beer drinker, but my mother always loved a good beer after she came in from the garden, and there's a lot of people I know in the beer drinking thing, so I will not take a prejudice against them. There are a lot of crops that have much more water usage than others. Almonds, for example, have just a hellacious amount of water usage. Rice obviously has that context and all that. So we're going to have to figure out all the fresh ways of doing stuff, or urban. The idea that there should be empty fields doing nothing in any city that's just a vacant lot, that's absolutely stupid. We should be growing crops there if they got the rain for it. Just as empty buildings are idiotic. If there are homeless people, shouldn't we be having these things converted over so that people can live there and make use of them? I mean, these are all the practical things that we can do. And you'll need largely a non-market oriented, progressive set of legislators to do that. You're not going to find the Rhino Trumpista Party doing that. Just forget it. And I can't get my local. Oh yes, exactly. We got have to be hooked to the grid and backfeed what you have excess, but they don't have to pay you if less than a megawatt. Yeah, see, all of that is just plain stupid. And the technologies will be developing in so many different ways. I'm not sure. Another little term to keep in mind in the brain is piezoelectricity, which is the electricity that can be caused from a surface from just stepping on it. It's not clear whether this can be done technologically or not, although I think the study of biological systems and invertebrates and bacterial membrane structures and all of that will probably be able to give a certain measure of technological improvement here. We're digressing a long way from idiot, but who cares? But in principle, if it can be developed technologically, a piezoelectric paving system would be logical. Imagine a roadway where the people driving down it with wheels interacting on it is generating energy. Walking down a sidewalk is going to be generating a little bit of energy. And so you can have things that can be used piezoelectrically to perhaps even keep sidewalks ice-free during the winter in places that get cold, or run cooling systems and fans and the like to adjust air around you in the places that are hot. Who knows what clever things people can come up with. Great scourge is NIMBYism. Yes. Well, that's part of it. One thing that would be something that would be a progressive rule, that people who own companies that do stuff that maybe pollutes should have to live there. That's where their residence should be. If they're proud enough and happy enough of their company to clip the coupons and get the revenue from it, but not so happy that they want to live there, as we all know, the record of companies that put environmentally dicey operations in poor people area, or where there aren't any wealthy people to complain. And this is just something that the various Indian groups around the country have discovered, where so much of their, where to some extent the trade-off of economic development at the expense of health, it's awkward. So we don't want to stiff people anymore. As a species, we're perfectly clever enough. We're also have Putin. And people like them, control freak cultures like we find in China and others, and information distortion cultures that ain't going to help matter. So it's going to be an interesting time. I hope to be around for another 20, maybe more, who knows? And keep busy right up, hopefully, to the very last minute when I drop dead at my typewriter, or I should say word processor. But that, though, the younger generation, for you youngins watching the show, you're going to be living in that future. And I hope that enough clever people have gotten elected that there might be some people in the sciences that would be in political office. Do you think we have too many lawyers, too many ex-actors and reality TV star people who think the presidency is an entry-level position? This is just plain dumb. And this is something where local media and citizenry have to be involved in this to create the essence. Hello, Chan official. How are you? From Dallas, the time zone is perfectly fine down in there. Source methods is important. I was in my lecture that I gave to the audience there on Saturday. I called attention to that. In fact, there was a fellow from Pakistan that was talking about how he was trying to fight misinformation in his culture back home in Pakistan, and how that was a threat to reason and progress. I was saying, yep, that's it. That the kinds of issues that I was raising in terms of the separation of church and state, and how you have to hold people accountable methodology, is something everybody on the planet, every culture, there is no place on earth that is immune from this need to do that. So there we go. That's the superstructure of things. And Brian, are you one that got my Paralogs of Phileas Fogg book up there? Let us know how the thing is coming along in there. 6 p.m. here on this wonderful flat earth of ours. Yes. How do you manage to stand upside down there in the southern hemisphere that's not a hemisphere because we're all on the same side of the ice wall? I can't figure out how that works, you know? I still want to go for the taco shell shaped earth. I think that's got the whole thing. I mean, it's got a nice topological shape to it. And like your pizza pie plan, flat earth, you know, you can put your taco meat and your shredded lettuce and all of that stuff. It holds in really nice. So clearly, if you're planning on eating off of your planet, the taco shell shaped earth is much more sense, and clearly would have to be intelligently designed, I think. Absolutely. So yeah, 4 p.m. down there. Okay, there we go. A lot of fun little games going on here. Anyway, I'm hoping then to hit as many of the issues that weren't covered in volume 1 in volume 2. And quite a lot of the stuff that's going to be related to the geological material is going to be bumping over into other chapters because it's deployed along the way, Grand Canyon stuff and all of that I had originally planned on having a big section in the chapter on the big slush. Turned out involved in somewhere else. So hopefully, if we're lucky, we'll be able to squeak it all in such a way that we'll be able to get it in a second volume. Or horrifyingly, we discover that we've bitten off even more than we can chew. Maybe we'll go for a volume 3. I don't know. We'll find out what's going on. But we really don't want to miss anything on it because there's so much wonderful stuff going on. This will be the first analysis of the Ark Encounter kind list in relation to all the problems with it. And of course, there'll be a wonderful little chapter on the flood legends around the world and the mythologies of the mythology idea, because some of the cultures have, they got some flood type tales, but they're not really very much like the Noah tale, particularly the Egyptians. And in China or Hong Kong. Yes, which is starting to be pretty much the same thing these days. I had a dreadful worry when Britain decided to hand Hong Kong over to the Chinese, and they promised, we're going to respect their rights. Yeah, right. So unfortunately, all the kinds of things that we're seeing happening, slowly boiling the frog in the water there in Hong Kong, none of that surprises me. They should made it a separate, just give Hong Kong their independence and keep them as a little separate spot, but not try to amalgamate them with the Chinese. But it's a done deal now, so we'll find out. It'll be an interesting race going on between the control freak culture that's going on in China, and they now have the accessibility of a advanced surveillance state with all of the smartphones and all of that, and the issue about there's the notion of like the mandate from heaven in Chinese culture, and it hasn't really gone away, even in the secularist communist ideology that they have laminated on the top, any more than it went ahead with all the other various cultures that have come in. But the thing is that let me give you a little warning: a market capitalist innovative culture is at the opposite polarity of a control freak culture. That if you try to make a society where your clever brains that are trying to invent things have about a third of their mind looking over their shoulder to make sure that they keep their social credit score high, they're not going to be nearly as clever as if can go with it. Because as we history of invention, a lot of the inventions and innovators in society are real sons of bitches. They're complicated. They're annoying. Musk and true of John D. and Henry Ford and Tom. So you can have a innovation. Invention aren't really revolutionary. Societies that come up with new ways of doing things like that threaten to blow their culture to smithereens at any moment, destabilizing. And that's what is so